While if you go in the old world, an old traditional way of thinking is that you are not, you don't want to add any chemicals or anything in the vineyards because that will alter the microorganisms, or it will alter all kinds of things in your soil. So you have this natural yeast still on your grapes and on the leaves, and you can then use that for your advantage.
It allows me to bring the grapes onto the press pad in a much more true manner, and then not have to do as much, not really have to do anything in the winery to quote-unquote clean them up. You know, I'm not using bentonite, I'm not using any fining agents, and so a lot of those agents, not only are you taking the things out of the juice, out of the wine that you don't want, but you're also taking characters that you do want. So, you know, by not using those products, I think we get to the end product with a much more, it's a good one, a much more true expression. That's a good way to put it.
You don't wash them.
Exactly. So you do no water. Well, absolutely not. So then you take advantage of that in the winery, and then you will, since the vines or the wines can ferment naturally, and since you don't use any chemicals here, you have quote-unquote clean fruit on the press pad. We sort twice. You hand pick, and then you're also sorting. You have probably 8 sorters you will see here. So when we do the Pinot. The second thing that will lead to that is that we don't have to use so high sulfur levels. So the sulfur levels in our wines are very low. Our late harvest, we just brought some measurements from the lab. They were below 75 parts per million, which is lower than organic levels. And it's not that we're trying to make an organic wine. It's just that's if you're doing the right thing here, it will end up being correct in there.
No doubt about it. It creates more work to do things in the manner in which we do them. I feel that way of operating has improved the wines and improved the quality of the wines. You know, so even though we've created more work, I think it's paying off tremendously.
I don't know if Fred is eating allowed. Are you allowed to eat those grapes?
You have to taste them.
You have to taste them.
You have to taste them.
Make sure they are
Sugar's up.
make sure your eye and your palate are in tune.
What are you looking for? Raisins?
No, only a small portion are dehydrated. But we're looking for slightly underripe fruit, that we're sorting out for sparkling. So we'll press those off, whole cluster press. The underripe clusters for Blanc de Noir.
Like a white, but I don't think
It seems like a good vintage for Pinot.
I think it will be. I think we've had just tremendous ripeness. It's what I've noticed is taken a little bit longer than I expected for the flavors to really intensify, but the cropping was right. I think we were just over 2 tons per acre, and yeah, this just looks tremendous. The slightly underripe clusters are, you can see them in the light. They're just a hint of pale close to the stem, and so they're fairly easy to pick out. And I think we're getting closer. Part of it is not just making 1 or 2 wines, it's making a consistent wine every year regardless of the vintage. And it's not making the same wine regardless of vintage, it's making a consistent wine. regardless of vintage. And I think that's where we have to get to as a region, is when we have the really cool vintage, be able to make the best Riesling or Chardonnay or Cabernet Franc we can out of that vintage, and still make that competitive to anyone else who's making Cabernet Franc or Riesling.